Let me ask you something. How is it easier for a French citizen to enter 30 African countries without stress, but a Nigerian struggles to enter Tunisia, a Ghanaian struggles to enter South Africa, a Cameroonian needs paperwork to enter Morocco? We share the same continent, we share similar cultures, we share colonial history, we share the same pain, and then we say Africa should unite. We talk about Africa, we talk about Pan-Africanism, but why do we still need permission to see each other? But here is the real question nobody asks. Why is Africa still divided 140 years after the Europeans divided it? To understand why Africa is not visa-free for Africans, we need to go back to a room in Europe, not in Lagos, not in Nairobi, not in Accra. No African chief, no African king, no African voice. A room in Berlin in 1884, just European powers, with a map on the table, with rulers in their hands. They began to draw lines, lines that did not care about culture, lines that did not care about history, lines that did not care about language, lines that did not care about tribes, just lines for control. And those lines are the borders we stand in front of today. But here is the deeper question. Did Berlin only divide land? Did it divide trust? Or did it only split territory? Or did it plant seeds that still affect African movement today? Please stay with me, because this is not just about visas. This is about identity, sovereignty, economics, and the continent still negotiating with its past.
I have to now apply 35 different visas on my passport.
In 1884, European powers gathered at what we now call the Berlin Conference. Countries like Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and others, they agreed on how to divide Africa without fighting each other. They created artificial borders. They split ethnic groups into multiple countries. That's why we have the Hausa people living in Nigeria and in Niger. The Ewe people live in Ghana and in Togo. The Somali people live in Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. Families were separated by colonial ink. And before Berlin, movement across Africa was fluid. Trade routes existed. Cultural exchange existed. Africa was not borderless, but the borders were flexible. The Berlin Conference changed that. It turned land into properties, and properties need protection. That is where visas begin. Here is something people don't talk about. Colonialism didn't just divide land, it divided trust. Different colonial powers ruled differently. French colonies were structured to depend on France. British colonies had indirect rule system. Belgium exploited Congo brutally, and Portugal delayed independence violently. And so, when independence came, Nigeria was shaped by the British, Senegal was shaped by France, Angola was shaped by Portugal. And you know, they all have different languages, different legal systems, different currencies, different military traditions. Now imagine trying to build visa-free travel across nations that don't even share administrative system. Europe took decades to form the European Union, and even then, free movement only exists in the Schengen area, and not all European countries are part of it. Africa is trying something similar with the African Union, AU, and the African Continental Free Trade Area. But here is the catch. Europe integrated after centuries of war. But Africa tried to integrate while still being economically dependent on former colonizers. And that's the big difference. Security fears and economic imbalance are other reasons why Africa isn't fully visa-free. In Europe and under the Schengen system, Germany and France differ. Their system is stable, their currencies are structured, and their enforcement system are strong. In Africa, countries face instability. Some struggle with currency volatility. Some experience political unrest. So governments fear. What if opening the borders increases unemployment pressure? What if it causes migration imbalance? What if skilled workers leave the country permanently? It becomes protection, not unity, and sometimes fear. Visa systems allow governments to screen risks, monitor who enters, and protect political stability. May not be ideal, but that's how states think. Not all African economies are equal. South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, and Egypt, they all have larger economies. Smaller economies worry about pressure on infrastructure, brain drain, job competition. When economic development levels differ widely, free movement becomes politically sensitive. Even in Europe, wealthier countries debate migration. Now imagine Africa, where unemployment is already high in many regions. Some governments fear that unrestricted movement would create tension. But here is something deeper. During the colonial rule, Africans needed pass to move within their own land. Identity was documented. Borders were controlled to serve colonial extraction. After the independence, African countries inherited the same bureaucratic systems, same border posts, same passport mentality, same administrative mindset. We replaced the colonial officers with the African officers. The system was not redesigned. I believe that there is hope because some African countries are removing visa restrictions for Africans. Recently, Rwanda opened up visa on arrival for Africans. Ghana announced free entry for Africans. The African Union introduced the African passport idea, but the implementation is slow. Why? The reason is because visa-free travel requires trust between governments, data sharing system, strong border management, political will. And trust is hard when colonial borders introduced competition instead of cooperation. The scramble for Africa didn't just divide land, it created national identities based on colonial borders. Today, Nigerians think like Nigerians, Kenyans think like Kenyans, Togolese think like Togolese. Pan-African identity exists, but nationalism is stronger. Colonial borders became emotional borders. So when visa-free policy is discussed, leaders prioritize national interest first. Why? Because sovereignty is sacred. Europe built integration slowly. Coal and steel agreement first. Secondly, trade. Thirdly, political union. And then free movement. Africa is following similar path with African Continental Free Trade Area. But the integration takes decades. The scramble for Africa created fragmentation, and undoing fragmentation takes time. And sovereignty was hard-earned after colonialism. So here's the truth. Africa is not visa-free because Africans hate unity, but because 140 years ago in Berlin, unity was not designed into the system. Africa was designed to be divided. Divided for extraction, divided for control, divided for profit. And we are still living inside borders that were meant to serve us. But the beautiful part, unlike in 1884, today, Africans sit at the table. And the question is no longer why did they divide us, but how are we going to unite ourselves? Because the future of visa-free Africa is not in Berlin. It's in African leadership, African policy, African courage, and maybe in our generation.